back.
Yeah, mic check, mic check, mic check. Oh man, we are here. We are officially back and we are officially live. Welcome to the Kickin the Real podcast. I'm your host, Andy Diosa. If you're a first time listener, thank you for being here. And if you're a multiple time listener, thank you for being here. I know it's been a while, and I don't like to apologize about that because we have things to do. But this is a perfect opportunity to bring in a very special guest. I love the fact that I get to bring in people that I know in this industry that do so much great work. And it's timely. It's timely because there's a lot of things going on in Seattle. I got my brother with me. He's a reporter, a commentator. He Sounders at heart, Pulso Sports. He has his hands on everything going on in the Pacific Northwest. And best of all, he's a fellow Colombian here with me. Mi hermano, Niko Moreno. Thank you for coming through to kick with me. How you feeling, brother?
Baby, parceros. That's what really matters, man. No, happy to be on. Always happy to talk to a fellow Colombian about the league. And yeah, we've been lucky enough to be, in the PNW for a while and lock down some of the information here in the Seattle area. The Sounders are a fun team to cover. So, man, I'm excited to be on and talk to you about what's going on in the 206.
Yes. Thank you for coming through as always. It's the Sounders are one of those teams that you could have endless conversations about in MLS, and it's like I said, great timing here. But before we get into all that, as I do begin all these episodes with, I like to give the listeners a little background on the guest, how you got started in what you're doing, and how kind of that progressed. So, Niko, the floor is yours for a little introduction.
Yeah, man. I've been doing this for about 14 years. I started in what used to be ESPN Deportes Radio here in Seattle. It no longer exists. ESPN Deportes Radio, it's overall nationwide gone completely. But here specifically in Seattle, it actually left the city a couple of years before it all kind of went down in flames, to be honest. But man, I've been doing the Sounders coverage, Sounders calls, and even Seahawks calls for ESPN Deportes for quite a while. I got into this game with Felipe Maqueda, and I was doing a little bit of a weekend show. It was just on Saturdays. It was a 2-hour show. All sports, so we would talk Mariners, Seahawks, Sounders, and that kind of led me to essentially at one point be part of the caller and analyst commentating for the Sounders, and haven't stopped since then, man. So it's been quite a while, since about 2011, 2012, on and off, covering the team in different capacities. Now I'm more of a columnist and analyst and reporter, mainly for Thunder Heart and Pulso Sports. But I'm one of those guys that's at the training grounds as much as I can. Used to be a guy that used to get into it with Siggy Smith, rest in peace. And got to see Christian Roldan get in from UW, not get minutes, ask Siggy why he wouldn't get minutes. Got to see Freddie Montero light it up here, Obafemi Martins, Clint Dempsey. But that's my background, man. It's just mainly radio. Love debating. That's why if you ever see me on X, I ain't mad about you not, being okay with my takes. I want you to push back. I want you to have your own takes. I did a lot of that in radio. People will call in, hey man, you crazy, you don't know Liga MX, you don't know MLS. I love that, being able to provide my takes and debate, man. I don't say anything that I don't mean, and I don't say anything that I can't back up. So I'm more than happy to always debate. And now I think I've maybe turned a corner this year, and maybe halfway through last year, more into the English column. And as much as I would love to stay Spanish, man, I really would. There's just more demand for English, man. And so I've been doing that a lot this year. And now with this World Cup coming to Seattle, I'm also hoping to do a lot of that coverage here with Fox 13, which is the local Fox here in the city of Seattle. And yeah, man, that's kind of a little nutshell about how it started here.
I love that, man. That's a great background, and also just listen up certain names of players over the years for the Sounders and in that area is is so cool because, like I mentioned, the Sounders have a lot to talk about, and they're always there. And we will talk about the Sounders specifically here, but it is cool to kind of get that background. And yeah, man, you gotta stand 10 toes on your takes. You're not out there saying crazy stuff, and the fact that you're willing to embrace that conversation in those debates. So yeah, that's a little background on Nico. And of course, the Spanish side, I understand that completely. The good thing here is that we could talk whatever language we want. So si queremos hablar en español, hablamos en español. We want to talk in English, we'll talk in English. This is a very bilingual podcast, trilingual for whoever speaks more languages. And, we probably have a lot of listeners that could understand. So I do appreciate that. Let's start off with this for the Sounders because there's MLS season just started, right? But I want to start with CONCACAF Champions Cup because this is a tournament the Sounders won a few years ago. I say a few, and it seems like it's longer now. But anyway, the tournament that they won when it was called CONCACAF Champions League. And this is one of those things that has always been a little bit of an issue for MLS clubs, right? And the Sounders were kind of one that like broke that down and were like, hey, we won this. They went on an incredible run and through Liga MX teams playing in Mexico and then playing in Seattle. They win the final against Pumas. It's a great game. I was there. We talked that day in the press box. It was amazing, beautiful. But it just seems like it's always favoring Liga MX in this tournament. And we see over the years that MLS teams can make a run, but then they'll might get to that final stage. And we saw it just last year with the Vancouver Whitecaps. And then they get, they lose. And they lost in bad fashion against Cruz Azul. But this Seattle team, speaking of Vancouver Whitecaps, has this matchup with the Whitecaps, which is very enticing because the Whitecaps are a great team. They went to MLS Cup last year. They went to CONCACAF Champions Cup final last year. So this is the Whitecaps team, very well coached by Jesper Sorensen. They have all these great players. Thomas Mueller's there. Like you could list many, many things about the Whitecaps. And yet they run into the Seattle Sounders. And the Seattle Sounders seem to do typically what they always do is say, you know what, we don't really care about the other stuff. We're going to do what we do. And one of the more dominant games I've seen from them in a while in that first leg, they win 3-0. You get to see Paul Arriola score twice, which is one of those things that is, as a fan of MLS, makes you kind of happy. Maybe besides fans of certain teams, but makes you kind of happy. You see Paul Rothrock score. It's just Sounders made the Whitecaps look out of their element, and then they go back in the second leg. They're able to get the result and move on in this tournament in very convincing fashion. So first, I want to get your thoughts about that tie against Vancouver, and then we'll talk about what awaits Seattle in the quarterfinals.
Look, man, you said it all, and we'll talk about the importance of being the Seattle Sounders in their trajectory and their ability to been there, done that. I was one of the guys that was at Estadio Olímpico in Ciudad DF when the Sounders went down 2-0 against Pumas, and they were able to dig from that deficit and tie that game, give themselves a chance, and then bring it back to Seattle, and then win that final here at home. So I'm not surprised that the Sounders do well in this tournament. Maybe this year I give them a lot of praise that they look. Anytime that you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will, in MLS in today's day and age, is difficult. If you want to be LAFC, you want to be in Miami. I mean, you have to bring it, right? Not every team gets to bring Son. Not every team gets to bring Lionel Messi or Griezmann. Now we can talk about that, but it's the Sounders have always been true to their form and their mythology, which is we're gonna invest in our academy. We're going to invest in our pipeline, whether it's through Tacoma Defiance or the academy, bring in certain players, and then we're going to go out there and get some really good players that are going to amplify our game, right? And that was true when the Sounders won their CONCACAF Champions League at the time, and they had a guy like Lodero, they had a guy like Raul Ruiz, and in today's form, they're able to maybe rely a little bit more on that academy and domestic product because Garth Lagerwey, before leaving to Atlanta United, he did a great job at investing in that pipeline. And that today is coming to fruition. And the Sounders are able to get players like Snyder Brunel and Tino Lopez and all these guys that you're all of a sudden being able to rely on to come to the first team. So without getting too long-winded, when you talk about the Vancouver Whitecaps, the series, and what they were able to do in game one, man, it was impressive what they were able to do in BC Place, right? With a ton of injuries. Yammer Gomez Andrade, your best defender, a candidate for MLS Defender of the Year, a player that he is your most physical, most reliable defender. He's out of there. Jordan Morris, the team's franchise leader in goals. He's not available. Hassani Dotson, the guy that you brought in from Minnesota United, he's on concussion protocol. And still, you're able to put a team together to go to Vancouver and dominate that game. They didn't dominate possession. They didn't dominate certain facets of the game, but they were the most dangerous team on the field. And they did that because there is a soccer module. There is a theory. There is a system that works for everyone that's involved. And there is something that I don't think gets enough praise, right? Everybody praises the San Jose Earthquakes for bringing in Timo Werner, right? And they praise LAFC for bringing in Son. But there isn't enough praise that goes to teams that find other ways to win. So for me, seeing this team go out to Vancouver and beat an excellent, very well coached by Jasper Sorensen, Vancouver Whitecaps team, and completely put him against the corner and beat him 3-0, that was great to see, right? So from Paul Arriola, who you mentioned, a guy that was at FC Dallas, that came in almost as the BOGO, buy one, get one free for Ferreira, right? That's the guy you were looking at. Oh, man, Sanders got Ferreira. And me personally, when I got Paul Arriola, I was like, that's fine. Bring him in. It'll be all right. But once you saw him on the training field and you saw what he provided, you're like, man, this is a good deal, right? So he was able to perform. Paul Rothrock, a guy that comes out of nowhere, really. Tacoma Defiance, he's able to come in. You're able to put him into the first team. He gets a first team contract. He provides you with a certain level of dynamism, this adrenaline coming off the bench. Everything about the Sounders just seems to work. And against Vancouver, they put it all together. It didn't matter if they had Mueller. It didn't matter if at one point Brian White came into the field. It didn't matter. This team had a system. They were able to put that team away in Vancouver, and then it mattered, but they were able to manage the second game, which for your audience, if maybe they're not so in with what's going on with this competition, the Sounders, they had to go to Spokane, 5 hours away from Seattle. Lumen Field, their home, because obviously Lumen Field's getting ready for the World Cup. So there's grass being installed there. So they had to go 5 hours away from their home location to play the second leg. And they still had the advantage on the crowd. They had the advantage on the field, and they were able to beat this team 2-1 away from their real home. So you just got to praise the team that has that fortitude, that ability to understand what it takes to win a tournament. And that's why they are now next to the ready for the next round and ready to face a team like Tigres in the next round.
Yeah, very well put. I love everything about that breakdown of especially that first leg, because it's exactly what happened in terms of them being able to just kind of control that game from beginning to end. And then having to go to Spokane and play that game, but also, like I said, being able to get that result is what the Sounders are about. And it makes me think back to that Champions League final where, like, João Paulo was this touted player. He gets hurt so quickly in that game. In comes Obed Vargas, who we'll talk about, who has his own trajectory now. And it's like you said the key word, everything just seems to work. It's like a plug here. And you can't say that about many teams in MLS. If you could try to think around the league, like you mentioned, trying to keep up with the Joneses and bring these big name players in. But there is a lot of merit in being able to do what the Sounders do in terms of just kind of going through players. And you talk about Raul Ruiz earlier, who was a guy that just seemed to be a thorn in the side of every MLS team. He's no longer there. Jordan Moore, like, it's incredible what they do. And then, Christian Roldan turns into probably one of the most consistent players in the league over the years. And now you have this machine that you could start picking players and be like, all right, you have like you mentioned, a MLS Defender of the Year candidate basically every year. You have a a midfielder who is a star player, who is, you as a national team player. You have all these players, and then you have younger players that come in and are able to get the job done. So it is very impressive. We'll talk a little bit later about more of that kind of that longevity of the team. But Tigres, you mentioned, it's a good one because this is a big team in Liga MX, right? This Tigres team was on the verge of not even of making it to the next round, and they get a 98th minute goal against FC Cincinnati. I mean, I'm kind of happy that it happened that way. No disrespect to FC Cincinnati, because it probably would have been an easier matchup for the Sounders if they played FC Cincinnati in the next
I
round.
agree.
But the Sounders and Tigres is a fun one, and this is what we talk about always in these MLS circles here is like, let's see these MLS teams test themselves at this level. And this is a test for the Sounders, which they have many of those and they've passed a lot of those well. But how do you feel about this series coming up? That obviously they're gonna play at home, and they're also going to be able to play in a place that that is not easy to play in down in Mexico.
Look, the Sounders are going to have to bring it, and they're going to have to really channel that strength that put him through that final against Pumas, because El Volcan ain't nothing to play with. You know what I mean? I mean, that is a spot where you're going to have to have a game plan, execute it, completely ignore and try to, because it's not easy, that fan base right on top of you. Cincinnati wasn't able to do it. And I do think that there's been a little bit of a hyperbolic take on the league as a whole, when maybe Cincinnati's inability to hold a 3-0 lead is a bigger indictment on them as a team and maybe Noonan as a coach, rather than what everybody's talking about these days, which is MLS can't win away. It's difficult for them to win in Mexico. And although that may be true, to a league that, let's not forget, started in 1994, and we're comparing it to a league that was founded in the 1940s in Liga MX. So there is a different culture, there's a different background, and MLS teams are just starting to realize that playing away from the States, it's difficult, right? It happened to Columbus. It happened to Montreal Impact when they went to play that final at Azteca. Toronto, when they played the Chivas, right? It's difficult to play away from home. And now you're starting to understand, man, maybe it takes more than just soccer. And it does. You and I, as Colombians, we are pretty aware Copa Libertadores. It's hard to go play in Bolivia. It's hard to go play in Ecuador. It's hard to go play in Chile. You don't have to be the best team on the field. Sometimes home field advantage means something. And that's something that MLS has to figure out. But I do believe that Cincinnati was a team that has some inconsistencies, and that their talent, their roster, maybe it's not as portrayed. It's very simple to say, hey, you got so-and-so, and not realize that a cohesive unit, a collective group isn't quite there. And that's just what I saw out of Cincinnati. So Tigres put him to shame, 5-1. El Búfalo, Angel Correa, Cesar Araujo, former Orlando City. These guys went to work on Cincinnati. So they're a really, really good team. So Seattle is going to have to really be able to understand that, como me dijo mi papá, el respeto empieza en casa. Respect starts at home. So you better be able to, when it's in Seattle, make that count and give yourself some cushion. But then you're also going to have to go to Mexico and hold on to that lead, or make it count on the first leg and then be able to come back home and figure it out. So if there's a team that can do it, I think it's Seattle. But Tigres, regardless of them not being the Tigres of old, they just lost to Juarez this weekend. That's a good team, man. And I can guarantee you that all these guys are thinking of one thing and one thing only, and it's giving it to an MLS team. That is their objective. That's what they're thinking about. So Seattle's going to get the best out of Tigres, but I do have confidence that the Sounders can do it. I believe that this team, when healthy and when you allow them to have their best 11 on the field, they have a chance. And I do believe that they can go to El Volcan, get a result, and then be able to give them the chance here at home.
Yeah, I think you said the important part there is at the end is like, Liga MX seems just like they see the opportunity, especially in a quarterfinal of this tournament, and are like, oh yeah, we would love nothing more than to get this team out of here and do it whatever fashion it takes, but get them out of here. Because on the other side, it is not received well when these Mexican teams lose to MLS teams in tournaments in these instances. So this is, I think personally, probably the most exciting matchup for me of the quarterfinals. But those quarterfinals in CONCACAF Champions Cup are really good. We have Nashville playing Club America, which is going to be a banger. LAFC Cruz Azul still a little tricky about, but I think it could be fun. And then Toluca playing the Galaxy, which I think is going to be not close. But
I agree.
I think the Sounders are going to put up a good fight against Seagulls, and I'm very, very excited for those games. And yeah, you said it, man. They have to play that first game in Mexico, so they're able to finish at home, which gives them a big advantage if they're able to do their job whatever way Brian Schmetzer and company perceive that to be on the road, to then come home and try to use the advantage of being in Seattle to their benefit. But there's always the Sounders, right? There's something about them that you do feel that confidence. You do feel like if there's a team that will be able to pull this off, it's going to be the Sounders. And like I mentioned, we'll get to a little bit more of that, like DNA and longevity in a minute. But let's move on to MLS. It's been a pretty good start for the Sounders, I would say, in MLS. We're only a few games in. I think they'll only have one loss, and they lost to an RSL team who is, I think, very, very good so far, and they're shocking people in the MLS world in general. But I think it's not being talked about that the Sounders defense has been really, really good. And I know, we're always interested in who's scoring and who's doing what, but defensively, the Sounders have been sound, no pun intended, so far this season. And they've only allowed 2 goals, and they're able to, once again, to the conversation we're having with CONCACAF Champions Cup, to put it together regardless of kind of who's out there. And you've seen a bit of different players kind of get their chances so far because they have this early schedule congestion, but it's still working for the Sounders. What have you seen so far in these first few games in MLS, aside from what happened in Champions Cup for the Sounders to start the season?
Yeah, look, it has been, I got mixed feelings about the last game, but I've come to the conclusion that the Sounders have done a phenomenal job at getting 5 shutouts or 5 clean sheets out of their 7 games overall. They are able to be 5th in MLS and in the Western Conference so far, and they've been able to do it without being perfect. This team was relying on one thing and one thing only going into 2026, and it has paid off, which is continuity. This team didn't get the high-praised, high-valued signings, but they knew that they had a collective unit that with continuity was going to hit the floor running. And I think that they have from the very beginning. From Colorado, a very good game. Losing at RSL, which you mentioned, they have been a surprise. But if you, after 5 games, don't realize that RSL is going to be a problem, then you might not know ball. But RSL is a problem. Believe you me, RSL has some really good players under a very good structure. So that loss looks a lot better right now than it did maybe when it happened. But that's a very good team. They were able to grind a win out in St. Louis. They beat a San Jose team that was not just surprising teams, but that actually started Timo Werner that specific game. You went to Minnesota on the road and you got a result. So there's some really big and important scores that I think that the Sounders should be proud of, but he hasn't been perfect. And I like that. I like the fact that in Spokane, after a 2-1 win against Vancouver with Thomas Mueller, Sebastian Berhalter, Brian White, this very good team, Christian Roldan said, look, we can't be naive. We haven't been good enough. We need to control the games more. We need to be better. And anytime that you are able to say that with a win on your belt or a draw on your belt, makes a hell of a difference. So the Sounders have been able to get road wins, get big, important results, still trying to figure out where they need to get better. And to me, that's a huge advantage on the league, because I can guarantee you that in June, July, this team is going to be a lot better. Jordan Morris just got his first 20 minutes of 2026 against Minnesota. I mean, not 2026, but after getting hurt in the first game of the season, he just got those. And I think that he's an important player. Hassani Dawson was on the concussion protocol. Snyder Burnell has stepped up. To me, he looks like the better option, but now you have two options in Hassani, Snyder Burnell. There's just so much competition for the Sounders' main spots that to me makes me feel like in a couple of months, you're going to get the best out of the Sounders, and they still are where they are in the standings. They're still winning on the road, which is not easy in MLS. So you got to praise that for them. So it's been a positive start. I would say a strong start for this Sounders team, but I love to tell you without a doubt that there's room for improvement, and everyone in the club knows it, including the players and the coach.
Yeah, that's scary. That's scary for opponents. That's scary for anybody else in MLS to see that this Sounders team knows that they have a certain level of, I guess, competition that they could get to, a certain level of success that they could get to. And you mentioned it, they're fifth in the West, in a very, very good West already to start the season. But some of these results already are telling. Then you add the fact that they're playing Vancouver in Champions Cup. But the schedule congestion, we just talked about these two teams. In between the two Tigres games, they play RSL at home, which is, it's just like there's a week for you to have some competition to really show you where you're at. So I love it because the MLS season is so long, and it's almost like you have to look at it in certain pockets and certain blocks. But there is something about the Sounders team that's always going to have them be in that conversation. And if they're playing at a level that they know they could just constantly keep improving, which I think is kind of evident to people watching them right now, like I mentioned, very scary for opponents. And at the core of that, it's Brian Schmetzer, right? Like, this guy has been so consistent in his time with the Sounders, so consistent in MLS, and is one of those coaches that I believe truly he might get overlooked because it's kind of, sometimes it's not the most like, oh my God, the Sounders are doing XYZ, because it's like the Sounders are doing what we expect the Sounders to be doing. But to have that level of continuity, like you mentioned, of success that just becomes a standard for a club is not easy. And there's a lot of teams around MLS chasing that. And I also think that a lot of things the Sounders do get downplayed because, like, you're talking about a team that has already won this CONCACAF tournament. You're talking about a team that has won Leagues Cup. You're talking about a team that has won MLS Cup. Like, this team just is there, right? It's competing, it's winning. And for some people, like, MLS Cup might be the mountaintop, right? And for the Sounders, like, no, we're going to go try to, go get something else and go get something else and still be there competing for MLS Cup and still be there competing. So it is very impressive for me, for Schmetzer in general. I was just reading an interview that Danny Musowski had with Flash Score, and he said he's probably up there among the top 3 or 4 all-time coaches in MLS. And I think it's hard to disagree with that, right? If you know the league, if you've been watching the league, you could try to put a list together. But if you don't have Schmetzer in that list, in those high places, then I don't know what to tell you. As somebody that obviously speaks to Schmetzer more, I've been around him a few times. I think he's a joy. I do remember after the CONCACAF champion that they won, I remember him kind of saying, like, this is going to happen again. Like, an MLS team will do this. And he's like, there's so many good coaches around the league. And he started naming coaches specifically at the time. And that stuck with me because, like, in the moment of, like, this is a big accomplishment for the club, for the league, you're like, this is going to happen again. It's not that he was deflecting, but it's also him showing, like, this is the growth, instead of being like, yo, we did this. Like, this is what we expect our standard to be at. And I think that his approach to the game and his kind of the way he breaks things down a bit, and he's not too, like, overtly just out there. I still love his better than Bob quote after that 2019 game against Lakers. There's so many things about Schmetzer that just, like, stick out in my mind when I think about him as an individual. But as somebody that's around the team, as somebody that speaks to him often, just what standard and how important has what he has done in Seattle just kind of breeded for the Sounders.
Yeah, look, I've been around Brian a long time. Obviously, 14 years or so. I have been his defender. I have been his critic. Contrary to popular belief, and do not allow narratives to get you by, I have a lot of respect for Brian. Me and him get into it quite often because I do press him on things and he will push back. But I got nothing but respect for what he's done for this franchise. I think that his biggest attribute is just being a guy that understands his attributes, and he surrounds himself with a great group of people that can amplify what he does best, which I do think is reading the game right at the start, pushing and getting the best out of certain players. I don't want to give him all of the credit for the pipeline and developmental components of the organization, because I do feel like Garth Lagerwey had a huge part of that. Henry Browner, Wade Weber, Sean Henderson, who scouts talent all around the world. All of these guys are part of how good this team is able to find young talent, get academy product, and bring in guys like Yemer Gomez Andrade, Joe Paulo, all these guys that maybe they're not big names, they're not superstars, but they have qualities and they're very good in their own leagues. And you're able to bring them in to be pillars of your success rather than maybe bringing in players who are looking to your club more as a stepping stone, as you see in Atlanta, maybe with Almiron and Ezequiel Barco and all these guys that have been in the league that maybe are looking just to get to that next level. And so that's a credit to Seattle as an organization. But Brian individually, I don't think he gets enough praise for handling the locker room and being a guy that even when things are not perfect, because they haven't, and I think one of the biggest issues that him and I had were how he handled the Nicolas Odero last couple of years, the Raul Ruidiaz last couple of years. I do give him the benefit of the doubt in understanding what's next and what needs to take place to keep this team going. So when I look at this team today, I gotta praise Brian for how he handles the renovation of that next generation coming in and shifting the strategies and the objectives during the preseason to get his team right and better to the prior season. So last year, 2025, there was an objective to make the team be better offensively. The team didn't create enough chances. They weren't goal dangerous enough. So the objective was we need to be a better team offensively. And the result was the Sounders were the best offensive team ever. I mean, they created the most goals ever. They were able to do it by shifting their motto, creating more, adding more players into the attack. And this season, the objective was let's be better defensively. And they've been able to do that. 5 shutouts out of 7 games with the schedule that this team had isn't easy. And I think that Brian had a lot to do with being able to do that. So to me, Brian is absolutely, without a doubt, one of the best coaches to ever be part of this league. I believe he's above Bruce Arena, in my opinion. And maybe that's controversial, but I do believe he's up there. And I give him that because he was not just able to do it in the domestic level in MLS, getting 2 championships, getting to 4 Western Conference finals, but he also did it by winning a CONCACAF Champions League that was very difficult and that I don't think enough people praise the Sounders enough about. They talk about, oh, it wasn't America, oh, it wasn't Toluca, it wasn't Cruz Azul. It don't matter. The Leon team that the Sounders team went and beat without a lot of their pieces there because Raul Ruidiaz was hurt. And you had to start a 30-plus-year-old Freddie Montero up top in Leon was not easy. And this team was able to do it. Beating this Pumas team that had guys like Talavera and all these guys that were well-known players in Liga MX doesn't get the respect that it does because it's not America. And I think that's bullshit. And I hope I can say it. I'm sorry. You make sure to just beat me on that. But I think that's crap. I think that I was there. I was in that Stadio Olimpico with a 8-year-old kid right here because the press box wasn't in a press box. I was in a concrete box looking more like a hockey box with no glass. And I had a kid, 8 years old, just like giving me the finger the whole time. His dad was smoking, this lady over here is smoking. I mean, it was a wild like component, right? This was a hostile fan base, and the Sounders were able to come back from a 2-0 deficit to tie that game 2-2. And to me, yes, you had to do a lot with Lodero on the field, getting the troops riled up. You had a lot to do with the way those players handled that game. But Brian Smetzer deserves also a lot of praise. So to me, he's an innovator. He's a pioneer. He's someone that's uh, successful, and his wins ratio in MLS overall are not talked about enough. So I have nothing but praise for Brian Metzer as a coach.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it's very important to mention the rest of coaches' stats as well, too, right? Because the head coach is always going to get that praise, but there's so many guys along the organizational level in Seattle that have crazy roles that are behind the scenes that maybe people don't know about. And I love that you mentioned Wade Weber, because I remember speaking to Obed Vargas a few years ago for an interview, and there was somebody he specifically mentioned by name. So there's so much that goes into all of those things and that success. But like you said, man, it's just one of those things that people like to kind of gloss over. And I think it's that, oh, it's the Sounders. Like but it's like, no, you can't diminish their accomplishments just because they're always consistent and always doing that. Like, that's not how this works, especially in a league that has so much parity that, sometimes one year teams will be good and then the next year they'll be terrible. Somebody gets injured or whatever the case may be. The Sounders do always seem to find a way. That is a slogan, and it is very true. But I think that in general, he's just been great for the league. He's been great for the organization, and if it continues being that way in terms of just like, hey, whatever, man, let people think what they think, we're just gonna keep doing it, then the Sounders team is never gonna, I think, change organizationally, because the foundation has been set and has been tested over and over and over, and they're proving. And now they're once again at this stage of a quarterfinals for CONCACAF Champions Cup. Least Cup will roll around again later in the year, and then they'll somehow be top 4 in the West again when the season finishes, and the playoffs are a whole nother animal. But yeah, I think I'm one of the guys that likes to give Spencer the praise he deserves, because it's definitely warranted. And yeah, I think it's also cool that you've been around so long, and this is very important for people that maybe are not in the know of how all of this works. But you've been around the team for so long. Of course, you're going to have these conversations, these debates, these misunderstanding with coaches, and that means a few things. But it means, A, you're doing good work, and B, you're challenging where you need to challenge things. But it's like, I'm here, right? Like, coaches are not perfect, results are not perfect, and that's part of the job that I think makes it fun, because it's like, it's fun to cover good teams, right? But it's also boring in certain ways when there's not that much going on, because it's like, oh, this team won again. I always equate it, for me personally, with LAFC in 2019, and this will tie back in beautifully with Seattle at the end. But 2019 LAFC team, people were like, oh, one of the best MLS teams we've seen ever. Carlos Vela, MVP season, Golden Boot. They beat everybody. Like, they were just running through the league, and I was at most of the home games like that season. And I'm like, I feel like I've written the same story over and over and over, because they're just scoring, they're incredible. And then they get to this conference final against Seattle, and Seattle's like, nah, not us. Like, Seattle in LA comes into Bank of California at the time, completely bullies LAFC, and that was when we get the infamous "better than Bob" quote from Schmetzer. But it was such a big game at the moment. Like, it felt like one of those MLS Classic stages. So Seattle was like, we're not having any of that. Like, there's no chance, and just bullied LAFC completely out of their own stadium. So it's like you see moments like that, you witness moments like that. Like you mentioned, being in Mexico and seeing how that atmosphere is, and you're like, man, this is very impressive and stuff that needs to get more shine. So I do love that. I do want to ask you about Obed Vargas specifically, because you mentioned Wade Weber, and Obed Vargas at his young age is somebody that went through this crazy pathway, being from Alaska, playing for Tacoma. And it's so impressive that in a league now that we have these stars like Messi, like Son, like all these major names, right, that we've seen in world football throughout the years, legends for many. And then you have also a pathway that gets overlooked. And if you're speaking about overlooking things, specifically up in Tacoma, that gets overlooked in certain ways. But us that are around the league, we know how these things work. Obed Vargas is one of these players who is now playing at Atletico Madrid, one of the bigger clubs in the world by name. I don't want to say by results, but by name at least for the most part. And it's just great. It's great to see personally from a fan of the league level. It's great to see in general a young kid kind of just follow those aspirations and follow that path, but also see how it happened, right? We mentioned earlier the CONCACAF Champions League final where he has to get subbed in for a dude that was one of the main guys, like really pulling the strings for Seattle that year. He comes in as a young kid, and I remember him telling me specifically, he's like, the only thing I wanted to do is complete my first pass. He's like, I was so nervous that the most important thing was just complete the first pass. But he kept saying, like, the people that were around me, Niko and Raul, like there were so many veterans that were able to give him that confidence and able to kind of just like calm him down, and he turns into a catalyst for that team after the season, in the years that come, and then he makes his big move to Madrid. So speak about him a little bit and that kind of path and that success that he's having now. Now he's on this Mexico roster and he could be fighting for a World Cup spot, which is probably in his wildest dreams, right? Like that could be like a pipeline goal. But it is not forced, like so far fetched now because of the work he's put in and the success he had in Seattle.
Obed Vargas has been the most interesting and remarkable stories that I've covered during the years with the Sounders. I remember him being introduced at 16 years old with the team, meeting his dad, his brother Abad, his mom, and not really knowing at the time the talent that I was meeting, but immediately after seeing him perform at practice and then his number being called to play in Santa Tecla at a random, CONCACAF Champions League game. And I think both you and I, when we hear playing at El Salvador or playing in Honduras, somebody's going to knock you down. Someone's going to kick you above the knee, maybe above the ankle, and him being able to not be scared of those moments, perform, go beyond actually maybe expectations and be that good. You knew there was something different about him. Obed Vargas' ability to get better year by year, defensively, dribbling, beating guys off the dribble, passing, progressive dribbling, repress defense, all those things that maybe a lot of even senior players don't really focus on. That's what drew me to Obed Vargas as a player. And that's where I knew that he was special. But without getting into this rabbit hole, because I could talk about Obed Vargas for days, I do think that there is a quality that the Sounders look for that maybe is not what every team looks for, and it's called intangibles. They're going to assess a player beyond what he brings onto the field, and they will assess his home life, his inner circle, his work ethic, and all of these things that make Obed Vargas a player that maybe teams passed on, that maybe coming from Alaska, not a lot of people knew about, but the Sounders were so high on him right off the bat because they look for things beyond the pitch. So to me, just seeing him succeed wasn't surprising. It was about where he was going next. I thought he was going to go to Bruges in the Belgium League. There were a team that was very interested. There were scouting teams that were following him. PSV had 2 different scouting teams following him here in MLS. So Atletico Madrid came out of nowhere, but it wasn't surprising that they were able to zero down on a guy that he was so good at Club World Cup. He was so good with the team. He had all of these other intangibles that you might not see on your average player, that it was just a pleasure and a privilege to have covered him as young as he was, develop into this important, crucial element of the Sounders, and eventually now into a guy that just got his first start in La Liga, and that I do believe is gonna be a starter for the team. I think he's gonna take Johnny Cardoso's spot. I might get some heat for that. But I do believe that he's better than Johnny Cardoso, and I think he's gonna be better than Johnny Cardoso. So I'm just thrilled that I was able to see that entire career come to fruition in about 2-3 years span.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and it's great to see MLS it has these stories, right? Because as much as outsiders that don't like to follow the league or like to support the league, whatever they talk about, you just mentioned a PSV, a Club Bruges, Atletico Madrid having scouts and looking at these MLS talents, and there's plenty of these stories that have happened throughout the years with different players coming through different academies and pathways. But Obed is one that is up there. We're talking about a kid that's not even 21 yet and has such a bright future ahead of him in the soccer world. And it's cool to always be like, hey, man, I remember when XYZ, Tacoma, Seattle games, and it's awesome. So, yeah, shout out to Obed Vargas, man. A hell of a player, great person to talk to, and just in general, one of those players that you're going to root for personally forever, because why not? Now, speaking about rooting for players and speaking about being Colombian, we have to mention James Rodriguez, because James is in MLS. And as two Colombians who obviously are very, very invested in not only what James Rodriguez is doing, but in what is going on with the Colombian national team as the 2026 World Cup approaches very, very quickly. It's tough. It's tough, man. It's tough to see James in MLS. It is a lot that we could say about the situation. The situation itself is this, right? James is at Minnesota United, and it's a short-term contract, basically a training ground for him to stay fit and active. I say fit and active in quotations for the 2026 tournament, because we know if he's able to breathe and walk, he will be on Nestor Lorenzo's list and he will be playing for Colombia, which we love, because once he puts that shirt on for Colombia, he turns into Incredible Hulk. Let's put it at that. So it's one of those things where James's club career, we're not even going to get into that because that is a whole nother podcast episode.
Yes,
how crazy that has been. But I do want to ask you about this, because we've seen him only play like about 39 minutes or something like that in 2 games. There was a phantom injury that popped up out of nowhere. He's come off the bench late in 2 games. In pure James fashion, when he steps on the field, he makes some incredible passes that should not shock anybody at this point. But he's playing on a team that I don't believe to be that good. He is now with the Colombian national team, and Nestor Lorenzo, I believe, said today, like, James is in good shape. He's been practicing a lot. He has not been playing a lot. And come Thursday, when Colombia plays Croatia, I will guarantee he probably starts the game for Colombia. So what the hell is going on? How do you feel about James and MLS? And then we'll talk about Colombia in the World Cup.
James is being James. I mean, both you and I and anyone who follows or has followed James' career overall and follows the Colombian national team understand that there's a difference between James the club player and James the national team player. And he's always going to turn into that Super Saiyan, hair goes blonde, and he just becomes a whole other new player once he puts that Colombian jersey on, to when he's at a club where that maybe has been his Achilles heel, or that has been the biggest handicap of his career, is maybe being able to day in, day out, being consistent for a club. And this goes back well beyond like Rayo Vallecano or Olympiacos, or, I think it goes back to Monaco even, where he had issues being a guy that was consistently working hard. So when I heard that James was going to come to MLS, I was excited, because as a analyst who has no problem saying, look, I'm Colombian and I can fanboy sometimes, this guy is the Colombian GOAT. I mean, beyond Valderrama, beyond Falcao, or whoever you may think, to me, James is the greatest player of all time when it comes to the Colombian national team. But I also was not afraid to say he's not going to be a game breaker for Minnesota because he hasn't been for Leon, he hasn't been for Rayo Vallecano as of the latest, the last 3 or 4 years. He just hasn't been that guy because he wants to perform at the international level, and all he wants to do is with his club stay in shape to be a guy that gets forward. So is he brilliant? Absolutely. Is he talented? 100%. But is he a guy that's going to give you 15 games of great play? No, not at the club level. Now, is he going to give you 8 great games, 6 great games with the Colombian national team? Hell yeah, absolutely. Sign me up for that, James. But the the truth is that I do think that James is getting close to retirement. I think that he just doesn't have that level of discipline and motivation to be a guy that goes until he's 38, 39, 40. So to all the fans, just enjoy him for now. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to tilt the scales at MLS. I don't even know if he's going to be here beyond the summer in Minnesota, but I do know that he's going to have at least 2 to 3 games this season where you're going to be like, wow, that guy is unreal. That guy should be in MLS forever. Pay him whatever he wants. But I just think he's going to be here till the World Cup. He's going to do great at the World Cup. I do think that he's going to be fit. And I do believe that MLS will help him on the physical components of being ready for that World Cup. But beyond that, I can't really say. Is he going to be great for Colombia in the World Cup? I sure hope so. I got all my chips on that basket. I'll tell you that. You tell me, is James going to have a great 2026 World Cup? I'll put my paycheck on that he's going to be great. But for Minnesota United, not so much. But I do believe in Minnesota. I do believe in James the player, and I do think that he's going to have a really good World Cup.
It's such a tricky situation because it's like, why? Like, I thought he was starting this weekend 100%, and it's like, no, he's going to play like 15 minutes. And it's like, all right, it's a weird situation on that end. It's a weird situation on the fact that you have these two friendlies kind of bunched in this international break that are here in the States, which is great, right? He doesn't have to travel across the world like he has had to in other occasions for international play. And now you're like, man, the World Cup is kind of close. And now all we're hoping is obviously that he stays healthy, because that's what anybody's hoping for any player going into a World Cup. But it's like for those minutes to start adding up, right? And I think you say an important thing, like MLS will help him with that, because the intensity of the league, the pace of the league, like it will help him for sure. But it's like, when is that going to happen, right? Like, when is that going to come? So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like during this international break against Croatia and France, two big opponents. And then his next game is in Los Angeles against the LA Galaxy, which I will for sure be at.
Hopefully he starts.
Hoping that he gets to start his first MLS start. I think anybody's hoping that, because this is exactly the point, is what you said. Like, sure, we could decipher things as we want with his overall club career and things like that. But he's going to give you one of those games or two of those games or three of those games in MLS that you're like, yo, this guy is a freak. And then that's when you start getting back into the excitement level of like, this is the player we know. This is the player that we all know. It just hasn't been able to be there over a certain amount of time at the club level. But then I try to remind people, like, he's coming off of a great Copa America, right, where Colombia went to the finals. He's coming off a great World Cup qualifying cycle where he was the leading assist person in that cycle in a region that has top world-class players in every team, basically. So it's like there's a lot of merit to what he's able to do, but it's just so annoying on the back end when you're like, man, I just want to watch this guy play weekly and do stuff. And I think we have to like temper the expectations too, where we can't expect him to be Colombia James at Minnesota, but I do want to see him play more than 15 minutes here or there. So like you said, I hope he gets that start here against the Galaxy. Pero we know, like, if James is in his bag, it is going to be one of those things that is just incredible to watch. And like you said, we're going to put all those chips in the basket for the World Cup, because 2026 World Cup is coming up soon. And Colombia, I would say, I don't know if this is a bias take or not, probably, but I would say is one of the, I'll put 5 on it, one of the top 5 teams in terms of being able to win this tournament. And I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that the field is enlarged of teams. So there's not. I think that balance in the groups is gonna be a little different. We are lucky, or maybe we'll not be lucky. We'll see that we have to play Portugal in that last group stage game. But that's gonna tell you a lot about the team moving forward and how they not to overlook Uzbekistan and whoever makes it into that playoff spot. But that's going to tell you a lot about how the team matches up against these top tier countries. But you also have to look at the Colombia and what they've been doing and how they've been growing. And I know that's a whole conversation about Nestor and all that things. Pero it's consistency. The same thing you mentioned with Ryan Spencer, right? You have a consistency. You have a group that you've been working with over this time, and you see these improvements, right? There's 1,000 moments we could pick at Colombia that they've pissed us off during qualifiers and players and coaches calling up certain people that shouldn't be called up. But you see that consistency. And Colombia typically has been a pretty solid tournament team over the years, growing into that group and that core. But I'm with you. I think James is at the end, right? Like, I think this is it for him. So he is close to retirement. I hope everything that he gives us a great tournament. I surely believe that he will give us a great tournament. But we'll end off with this. How do you feel about Colombia going into this World Cup? Am I sipping the Kool-Aid too much, or are you kind of on the same level with me there?
No, on the same level. I think that, if you get the Colombia that went to that Copa America final, that beat Uruguay, that was able to get through injuries, that Nestor Lorenzo had as one of the best teams in South America, I mean, sky's the limit, right? I think that if you get that performance out of this team, I think they're better than Portugal. And I think that if they go first in that group, they give themselves a way better chance to get farther in this tournament. So they'll have the support of a high-based Colombian community in the United States. I think that they have a great talent base. I think that from back to front, whether it's starting off with Camilo Vargas at goal and the defense and the midfield and the wide players like Luis Diaz, I think they have a phenomenal national team. And if you look around and the teams that are out there, Colombia can go head to head with any of them when it comes to talent level. But when it comes to the collective play, I feel like that's where they have the edge. Nestor Lorenzo has had a long time to set a base of standards for his team. And I think that they'll be able to do it. So I'm with you. If it's not now, I don't know when it's going to be. And so I do believe that they're one of the top 5, top 6, top 7 nations in this World Cup. And if they're able to put it together, man, I think they can go very far.
I love that. And that means that nos vemos por ahí en unos partidos, because it's going to be, like you mentioned.
Claro que sí.
The fan base is going to be incredible seeing Colombians follow this team around the tournament. I already am planning my week in Mexico, because why not? It's going to be 2 back-to-back games over there. I can't wait. But don't forget, leading up into it, we have MLS, and y'all should be watching because there's a lot of great things going on in MLS. Niko, I appreciate you for being here. Last thing is, let the people know where they could find you, where they could consume your hot takes, your cold takes, not just playing, consume all of your opinions, your content, and all your great coverage for the Sounders and beyond.
Yeah, nothing but hot takes here. I'll tell you that right now. I'm controversial, but you can find me at El Rolo NW on X, El Rolo NW on Blue Sky. You can find me every Monday on Love and Scorchers YouTube page with our Love and Scorchers kickoff. Thursdays with Soccer Down Here in our Thursday morning show, and then Fridays on Sounded Out Hard Podcast Network with Jeremiah Oshan on what we learned this week, and of course everything that goes on with my Spanish coverage on Pulso Sports YouTube channel, and that's where you can find me.
You hear that, man? My boy is busy. He is booked. He took time out of his schedule to come kick it over here. Only the realness, only illustrious guests on this podcast. Stay tapped in with Niko. I'll make sure all of his information is linked in the YouTube description here and the bios on the audio platforms. And if you made it all the way to almost an hour listening to us, we appreciate you. We'll be back. I'll be back soon, and we'll keep the guest list rolling. Until then, much love. Peace.
My boy Andy.